Welcome to Subject to Power. I'm El Kamihira. I'm coming to feel more and more that the root of the problems that we, as in humanity, face have a lot to do with not knowing ourselves or misinterpreting or misunderstanding our motivations and maybe our history and why we do what we do. Our nature. We're often given an answer or a philosophy like Darwin's theory of evolution, for example, and we adopt these thought structures wholesale and give them enormous power to shape our reality. And one such powerful philosophy or thought structure is the idea of capitalism, or the so-called free market economy. An idea that's based in the belief that humans, from the dawn of time, exchange with each other for our needs. Goods, services, emotions, care, language, etc. That our very nature and social systems are essentially transactional. My guest on this episode, semiotician and independent researcher Genevieve Vaughan, has spent much of her long life theorizing and proving the very opposite, that we're not transactional at all, and that, in fact, we're something very, very different. So, with this concept of the gift economy, this is going to be a brand new concept, I think, for most of my listeners. And it is such a paradigm shift from the world we live in and the rules we live by that it takes a lot of effort to get your mind around the concept, vis-a-vis sort of our reality.
I've been trying to explain it now for many years, so
Yeah.
I know it's not easy.
Yeah.
And if it had been easier, we would have tried it before.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So in very short form, you're a founder of the International Feminists for a Gift Economy. You've written several books on the subject and edited others: The Gift Economy, Maternal Roots of the Gift Economy, The Gift and the Heart of Language. Can you say a little bit about how you came to this work?
Yeah, I went to college in the United States. I was born in the United States. I went to college there. I married an Italian philosophy professor and semiotician. He was invited to a group of professors in Bologna in Italy. We went there, and the idea was to apply Marx's analysis of the commodity and money to language. And so from that, I mean, I was so blown away by the idea. And then it kept on percolating in my mind for a long time. And I started studying Marx and language as well. And so I began to realize over a period of years that it really wasn't the market. Commodities and money could not explain language, because I had little children and they were learning to talk, and they didn't have any idea about what money was, and they didn't know about exchange and the market. And so it couldn't be that it functioned that way. I thought maybe it was the care of the children earlier on that gave rise to language. And then maybe later on after that, the money and the market came up. And if there were similarities, that may have had to do with something else that was in there that I had not understood, the connections between language and money and the market. And so I thought about that a long time, and I started writing about it. And this years passed while I was doing all this thinking and writing and so on. And after that, I became a feminist. The feminist movement in Italy happened. So I started going to a consciousness raising group, and I started thinking about, the whole idea of how women are unseen and unappreciated, and how many women artists and writers and so on there have been throughout the centuries, and they've never been accepted or admired, or their work really hasn't gotten into the mainstream, and patriarchy has been the main organizer of society. So I started putting those ideas together. Then finally, I went back to the United States. I got a divorce. And by that time, I had gotten the idea that really there was this alternative economy that was based on mothering, or in the mother and child relation. And it was sort of like Native American economies who didn't have a market either, or capitalism. And yet they could speak. They were talking just like anybody else. And so that was another proof that language didn't derive from the market. And I decided to try to practice the gift economy as I saw it. And so I did as much as I could because I had inherited some money. I used it for social change projects based on what I called women's values, which I believed were gift values, and I still do think that. And I did that for quite a few years and was involved in a whole lot of social change actions and projects. And then I decided I really had to write about what I had been thinking and practicing. And so I did do that, and I wrote a book, Forgiving, a feminist criticism of exchange. And so that was a big step forward for me. During that period of time, I had started a Foundation for a Compassionate Society. Really, I was trying to preach what I was practicing because I hadn't really come out and said exactly how it was. So I decided that I would try to promote the idea of the gift economy because I really think it is a deep alternative to patriarchal capitalism, and what we need in order to survive in these disasters that we've created, the environmental disaster and the terrible human disaster that we create through these horrible wars and world poverty, that too.
Yeah. So as you're talking, I'm thinking about the idea that you would theorize that language, human language, comes from the market is so absurd to me. When you, and it also makes me think of how mothering, which you write a lot about, which I want to dig into, is so devalued and hidden, and that these big male thinkers would not stoop to think that mothering is the basis for anything, or think about the enormous role and influence that mothering has on the development of a human being, including language. So if you can talk a little bit about sort of, the root of mothering and the connection to the gift economy. You've said it's not a sentimental concept. Mothering is the blueprint.
That's right. Yeah, that's what I think. Well, the first experiences that children have, that babies have, first in the womb and then after they're born, is that they are receiving the satisfaction of their needs from somewhere else. And then after they're born, whenever they have needs and they express them, or even if they don't, somebody has to give them something to satisfy their needs. And if they don't, the children die. So it is a basic interaction of giving and receiving that allows us to survive. Everybody. It's a universal. And that is, I believe, the hidden blueprint, the hidden basis of human life. And It can be sometimes not the mother herself. It can be another woman or a sibling or even the father, or as they say, a whole village can raise the child. But children have to have this or they don't survive. And the species would not have survived if they hadn't had, in the early epochs of humanity, if they hadn't had mothers taking care of children and also groups. So now the people who study prehistoric evolution of humans talk about how they had to have not only the mother, but also a community of some sort. Possibly also grandmothers helped to allow the group to survive and the children to survive. And so this is something that is really being studied a lot more now than it has been in the past centuries, but also in the past decades. There is a lot of study of infancy in a new way where they're really paying attention to what they call epigenetics. That is, what happens after the genetics are made in the body, then how the genetics are expressed and what happens after birth, and how the brain also develops in that period of time. And that's the period of time in which, that children have to be nurtured unilaterally. This whole idea of unilateral giving and receiving has seemed to be, to our culture, something that's extraordinary, that it doesn't really happen unless it's God being the big unilateral giver, you know. And mothers may do it, but the exchange, giving in order to get back, is really the basic human interaction. It's really not. The basic human interaction is giving and receiving. And then you can give again, or sometimes people do give back, or babies do give back, like you give back something else, like a smile or play a game. There's something they call serve and return, that the people who study young children, early childhood, talk about. There's this interaction between mothers and children where one does something and then the other responds with something else. This is really turn taking. It's not exchange. I insist on it being turn taking. It's way prior to exchange. The children don't realize the quid pro quo aspect of exchange. They've studied this at Harvard. They say that it's one of the most important interactions that stimulates the brain development. This is really very important, very essential, this interactive ways of doing giving and receiving and playing and taking turns. But it's not quid pro quo. It is something that maybe when we start having exchange, giving in order to get back, probably kind of fits into some kind of a form that's already exists in people's minds, that's based on this giving and receiving between mothers and children. But exchange actually distorts that giving and receiving interaction and, let's say, pattern. And I try to show how this giving and receiving is the basic pattern that can be repeated again and again. And it has a whole lot of different developments and branches, and it happens in a whole lot of different ways. But we don't notice it because we're always looking through an exchange-based lens. So I've tried to show all the different places that giving and receiving are the foundation and not exchange. And when we base our economy on giving and receiving rather than exchange, we create completely different human relations. And we don't create the kind of greed and motivations that our capitalist patriarchy is doing now. And that has ended up being so destructive. So my hope or my project is to try to return to a gift-based, a giving and receiving-based society, to this basic blueprint, and to eliminate as much as we can the exchange interactions. Of course, this is a very big project because everything now is based on exchange.
That's right. But you do talk about an interesting aspect of what this serve and return process between infants and their mothers, that it creates mutuality and a trusting connection.
Yeah. Of course, this beginning, it has to do with feeding a lot. And so the child receives milk that the mother gives. And this has to happen a number of times a day, as well as many other kinds of services that the mother gives to the child.
Without giving anything back.
Without getting anything back.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And this sets up a sort of a trajectory of something going from one place to another and that thing being accepted. And that when the thing comes from one place to another, the receiver knows that she has gotten whatever it is, and the giver knows that she's given whatever it is. So it is a common experience between the mother and the child. So there becomes a pattern that is visible, or not visible, cognizable, knowable, that happens between these mothers and children. And I think also that when a child's need is satisfied unilaterally this way, it gives value to the child, and the child recognizes that the other person is valuing them. So along with the gift, she also gives her value, a kind of a logic of showing or implying that the other person is intrinsically valuable, because otherwise the mother would not have given her what she needed. And so there is a way where that goes from one person to another, and then the other person can give to another person, and that value kind of goes around from one to the other to the other. As the gift goes around, so does the value, the valuing. This is a basic logic that we don't recognize usually. And what I say, like, if A gives to B and B gives to C, then A gives to C because it's gone through the different steps. And that is a logic of community, of valuing each other, that unites the givers and the receivers with each other. And that's also something we don't usually see. We don't think of that logic as existing, but it is there. And I really find a lot of unseen pieces of things at the underneath the superstructure of our exchange economy and our capitalist economy. There's this community economy that's there underneath, or the maternal community economy. And it has a logic. And we understand that logic, even though we're not conscious that we understand it. And I think also, going back to language, I think language is also based on that, because we're giving words to each other and we each receive the words and we know what they mean because of various other things that we'll have to talk about too. But it's a very complex subject, and the whole academic world is based on patriarchy and exchange and capitalism. And so when you try to do an alternative explanation of the world, you have to do a lot of explaining, and shows how the ideas of the academic world really do not explain the same things that the gift economy does, and the language as based in the gift economy does. And there are also other aspects of the world besides language that we don't see as gifting, but that are. I believe that from the very beginning, this blueprint functions in a really widespread way. It's an underlying logic and strand of understanding that is under so many things that we do, and that we don't recognize because we're always looking through this exchange glasses. And exchange since it's quid pro quo, since I only give you this if you give me that, it contradicts giving. Giving has this, and receiving has this circularity, has the ability to move, but exchange stops in the middle. I get this, you get that, and each of us goes our own way, and it's done.
So you talked a little bit about the gifting and gifting economy and the meaning of that, but I also wanted to sort of break down or explicitly explain how you look at the exchange economy. So the exchange economy would be what we are now living in writ large. What is it?
Yeah. So the simple part of it is this quid pro quo I give in order to get back of what you give me. And as I said, that contradicts the gift logic. And you don't even see the gift anymore once you're doing that. However, when one person gets more than the other person out of it, that's a gift that that other person is giving, unbeknownst to herself or unwillingly, to the other person who gets the more amount. I think that in capitalism, Marx talks about surplus value, which is that the value of the work over and above the salary that is paid to the worker. So the product is sold for more than what the worker's salary gives to him or her. And so there's that extra that is a gift to the capitalist, although the worker doesn't even realize it's a gift, but it is. It's the surplus value that it's kind of extracted from the worker. It is the prize of the capitalist, and it's that gift. So profit is a gift to the receiver, the capitalist. And women's free work in the home goes into making the worker, even herself, if she's the worker, able to do whatever it is in her job or his job. And she nurtures her family with her gifts, her free gifts. And then they pass those gifts on to the capitalist. So there's a flow of these gifts that are given to the capitalist without even calling them that. And it's just so many times that gifts are called something else and we don't recognize them. And so we don't recognize that they're unilateral. But once you start thinking of, is this unilateral, then it probably is a gift.
Yeah, you compare the so-called free economy to the GDP economy. I heard you mention some numbers, some comparative numbers that are really interesting. In the US in the 2011, now this is, of course, some 13 years ago, but gross household product was $11.6 trillion as compared to a GDP of $13.3 trillion. In addition, global ecosystem services have been estimated at some 125 trillion a year compared to the monetized economy, 75 trillion GDP a year. So maybe just like explain those numbers and what it means.
Well, it just means that much more of our whole economy is based on free gifts than we realize. And if you look at the global economy and at the environment, so many free gifts of the environment are just so much more than you would think as somebody depending on patriarchal capitalism for their livelihood. I think it's mind-boggling that we can realize that it seems like the market is necessary and it's the only thing that holds things together, and it is just not. Also, because if you think of how much of the profit, like I've been saying, is gifted, is work that's given without a payback, it's just obvious to me. I say that the economy is an island floating on a sea of gifts.
Yeah. I mean, nature doesn't charge. Coffee plants don't charge. Worms don't charge. Bacteria doesn't charge. So you can just look at nature and sort of understand like a whole other reality that's being obscured with the exchange economy.
We're destroying that. We're destroying the free nature. And we're not having free rain. The rain is coming down, but it can't nurture us because it's acid. Everything has pesticides on it, and we're just destroying the whole free thing as if we had a hate of gifts.
Yeah.
But it's because we don't understand that what they are. They're not just material to be made into products we can sell. Our priorities are wrong because they fit with the exchange economy and patriarchy because we want more and more. We want to be the one above the others and dominate.
Yeah. It's based on domination in the end. Which brings me to, I want to try to get the sort of gendered division of giving and exchange. I think it's really significant that the sort of gifts of women, like you were mentioning before, we birth children, we nurture them to be human beings, and that doesn't count as economy. Whereas men learn something entirely different and a different way of being. So there's a sort of ghettoization, I want to say, of women's work, of women's gift, where that's just their nature. It's chalked up to that. It's just who we are. It's just our nature. It doesn't get counted.
I guess what I think is that boys and girls, when they're little, they have the model of the gift economy in their mothers. The mothers are giving to them and they are receiving. And at a certain point, little boys learn that they're in a different category from their mothers. Unfortunately, they learn to do hitting. When you hit somebody, you give a blow to them and they receive it. It's like giving, but it is not nurturing. It creates dominance and it creates the superiority of the dominator over the givers. And the little boy learns that his category is a superior category to the category that his very mother is in, the one that he's been dependent on since he was a tiny baby. And so he has to create this other identity. And the model that he has is often, especially more and more in our society, a violent model, or at least a model of supremacy and dominance. And so, even our laws and everything, it's all how to dominate ourselves and each other in order to make us do the right thing. And so it's not based on gifting, this whole structure of society. It's based on domination. And the little boys learn that that's what they're supposed to be doing. Little boys develop so much more slowly than little girls. And I think one of the reasons is that they have had to change categories and learn to be something opposite to what they were thinking they were when they were just like their mothers, when they had to follow that maternal model. It's kind of like when a product becomes a commodity and for sale and has to be evaluated in money. Instead of just being used or given to somebody, it has to be exchanged and evaluated. And the same with a little boy. He has to find his model and his evaluation. And so it's, in a way, the exchange kind of imitates what the boy's trajectory is when he leaves his mother's category and goes into his father's or into the male category. And that must be, very traumatic for little boys. But what happens is that everybody in the society, mothers too, and especially the men, think that boys are better than girls.
Yeah.
And they're valued more. And so the girls too learn to value the boys more than themselves. And so the gifting that goes with mothering and being mothers and children gets devalued, and the whole patriarchal way and the exchange way get valued more. Unfortunately, that's kind of a double bind that happens in our childhood in society, at least in our society. We have created this society where exchange and patriarchy are overvalued. And actually, the whole gifting way is not only undervalued, it's penalized.
I actually interviewed Carol Gilligan on an episode much earlier, and she does talk about that, how the differentiation, obviously that's her life's work, the differentiation that happens in childhood between girls and boys, that girls are brought up to value connection and boys are alienated from that connection.
Yeah. If you have the idea of the gift economy and the exchange economy, it's a different kind of an explanation. It's not just that we're naturally that way or that we're socially that way. It's that there is a mechanism in society that's making us like that. I don't think it was meant to be that way, but the way it has happened has created this difference between women and men and this overvaluation of some things and undervaluation of others so that we don't recognize what's actually happening in our lives and in our world in general. And we create a whole bunch of problems that we wouldn't have to create.
That's right. And you know the very well-known saying, money is the root of all evil. And to hear you tell it, you would really think that. And I'm fascinated by your thinking around this. If you can talk about the role of money.
Well, I got started on thinking about money by reading Marx. And he has in the first chapter of Capital, his main best known book, an explanation of money and commodities. And I read that over and over again. And I think that actually his explanation is really very, very important. He talks about money as the general equivalent, and that is an abstract general equivalent for all different values of commodities. And it is that abstraction, that way of moving from interaction based on satisfying needs to an interaction that's based on estimation of value, which is value is something that you can't see it and and you can't eat it, and it's something that's way abstract out there, and that has put this abstract moment into our daily lives. There is this thinker called Alfred Sohn-Rethel who read those same things of Marx over and over again also. He talks about something he calls the real abstraction or the exchange abstraction. And what he says is that by making something abstract happen in our daily lives over and over again, also as our way of encountering each other so often in buying and selling, we have created a real abstraction in daily life that makes us think in abstract ways when we wouldn't be thinking that way otherwise. So using money is just playing havoc with our minds, making us think in a different way. And you might say, well, it's good to have this abstraction, but how do you know? What would we be thinking if we weren't thinking in such an abstract way? I think it's like we overvalue abstract thinking and undervalue concrete thinking, but it's really not abstract versus concrete. It's abstract versus an integrated way of thinking that is not in the opposition between concrete and abstract. Since women still have so much of our lives that is not engaged in exchange all the time, we have a chance to have that more integrated mentality. And our minds are not deviated into an abstract thinking that is not life-oriented. We really do have a handle on something else that the academic world, which is basically abstract, and the political world too, and the economic world, everything has this deviation from a direct and integrated way of dealing with life and knowledge.
Yeah, in simple terms, like a world of ideas rather than a world of real processes.
Yeah, but it's of ideas in the sense of ideas that are only partial. They don't contain everything that they need to contain. And one of the things they don't contain is human well-being. Well, think of the atomic bomb. That took a lot of abstraction to create. Did anybody think of it in terms of what it was going to do to us all? And so many other negative things that have been created through abstractions. Not all abstraction is negative, but if it is not actually grounded in a non-abstract, let's say integrated way of seeing the world, it goes out of bounds of what is a gift to humans.
Yeah, I mean, so many examples come to mind, like the stock market or prostitution, for that matter, the commodification of women's sexuality, or just so many markets come to mind, destructive, repugnant markets that run on the idea of buying and selling a neutral equivalence, but doesn't take into account what is happening to actual human beings.
Yeah, it doesn't look at the needs.
Doesn't look at the needs. Yeah.
Like the maternal gift economy pays attention to needs, not to just profit making, not the need for profit, but the human needs, the needs for gifts that are life affirming gifts.
And so we live on the planet that gives us life, and we've forgotten all about that fact. But at its root, I think the difference is exactly what you said, that the gift economy is needs-based and the exchange economy is based in giving to receive, which is essentially, and you say this, self-serving and self-interested.
Right.
It's giving in order to get back.
Right. And it's also giving in order to make money. You have a need to make money. Capital needs to be increased all the time. So you're satisfying the needs of capital instead of the needs of people. and then you say, well, this big capital that I have will satisfy such and such needs and make more capital. And so it's a ruse, it's just a way of being self-interested at the expense of other people and not satisfying needs.
So how do we move away from this?
Well, I think the state of the world is helping us because the environment is crashing and we have these horrible wars going on, genocide that we're doing, and millions of people are starving. And there's migration of people trying to come to a place where they can make a living, and we don't want them and we send them away. So we're not satisfying needs. There are just so many negative sides of the exchange economy, patriarchal capitalism, that we need to realize, and we can realize now that it's not working. It's just not working. And people are looking for something else. The thing about the gift economy is it's already there. It's underneath the exchange economy and patriarchy and capitalism. So how do we liberate ourselves from the exchange economy? Well, we begin to understand that first of all, that it's negative. And then we need to understand that the gift economy is there because we need to see it because it's been hidden all these centuries.
It's not something we have to create anew. It's already there.
It's already there, this interaction that has to happen because otherwise you die when you're babies. Everybody has it already. And so it already is the best candidate for the kind of interaction that underlies language and many of our other interactions that I'm not trying to go into right now, but also the whole issue of exchange and taking from gifting shows that the gift is still there. If you recognize that the exchange is actually parasitic on the gift economy, it's not a very nice word, but that's what it is.
Can you expand upon that a little bit? How is the exchange economy parasitic on the gifting economy?
As I said before, when a mother nurtures the baby and gives to the baby, she gives value to the baby and recognizes that intrinsic value. Then when the capitalist is investing and getting this money, it looks like he or she is getting this extra gift that they get, gives them value. It seems like maybe they even made it themselves or deserved it themselves. That's like their own intrinsic value is created by their own work, by their own investments. And maybe they've been lucky. So it's Lady Luck that has given them this intrinsic value. So it's really good for the ego to have that. And you don't recognize that it's coming from other people's work that you're exploiting. So it's easy to be happy as the parasite of capitalism. People don't know that. The capitalists really don't know that. They think they've succeeded. And they have succeeded, but they've succeeded in a system that is totally unfair and where you don't recognize what's going on.
Like rich landowners who get their gifts from nature and what's grown, and then have a wife and have many children, the labor of which rests on the woman. But who gets the most esteem in that situation, the most value in society in that situation? It's the rich landowner.
Right. Yeah, I think that's part of that whole overvaluation of boys over girls, because boys are not like their mother, whereas girls are. And that way of being in the same logic as commodities that are not gifts anymore, but they're commodities instead, products on the market. And so in a way, men have to kind of create their own value or something, whereas if they were living in a gift economy, they wouldn't have to do that. They would still be on the maternal model. And if we had a gift economy, the fathers would also be gifting, and the boys would not have to change their sexual identity away from the mother and into a masculine, non-gifting model. I mean, there are all kinds of things that you can see once you start looking at things through the gift economy lens. I think that by nurturing a child all day, every day, like women do, and satisfying their needs, that is transformative. It transforms the child because her needs are satisfied and she can grow. It also transforms the giver because the giver has to do all those things that she otherwise wouldn't have had to do. It creates a human relation between the two.
That's right.
And that is, I think, the main thing is that we need to realize that giving and receiving create a human relation, whereas exchange contradicts that relation. Our relations are based on that, even though we don't acknowledge it.
Yeah. Thank you so much for this conversation. Yeah. And I know there's so much more. This is just like scratching the surface of all there is to know about this thinking around the gift economy. And I hope we get a chance to speak again a little bit deeper about different things.
Sure. I'd love to.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Enjoy it.
Thank you for listening to Subject to Power. You can find the show online at subjecttopower.com or subscribe to the show wherever you find your podcasts. I'd love to know your thoughts on these conversations, so please drop a note on the website or find us on social media. The best way to support the show is to rate and review Subject to Power on Apple Podcasts. It really helps other listeners find us. Subject to Power is written, hosted, and produced by me, Elle Kamihira, Audio engineering is done by Jason Sheasley at Abridged Audio, cover art by B. Johnson, and music by Beware of Darkness.